He was the greatest inventor the ancient world had ever known, a man whose mind could solve any problem, build any machine, create wonders that looked like magic. His name was Daedalus, and his genius gave the world the labyrinth, the maze so cunning that no one who entered it could ever find the way out. But the story of Daedalus is not really a triumph. It is a tragedy about brilliance without wisdom, because nearly everything this extraordinary man created ended in death, and the cleverest hands in Greece would, in the end, bury the person he loved most. He built a prison for a monster and was imprisoned by it himself. He invented a way to fly and watched his own son fall out of the sky. How does the most gifted man alive end up causing so much ruin? That is the question at the heart of this story. So tonight you'll hear the real tale of Daedalus, the jealous crime that started it all, the monster and the maze, the wings of wax and feathers, and the terrible price of a genius that always ran ahead of his judgment. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in and let's meet the man who could build anything. Daedalus was an Athenian, born into the family of the ancient kings of Athens, and from his youth it was clear that he had been touched by a rare and dangerous gift. He was a craftsman and an inventor without equal, an architect, a sculptor, and an engineer all in one. The statues he carved were said to be so lifelike that they seemed about to move and speak, so real that people swore they had to be tied down to stop them walking away. He invented tools and techniques that had never existed before. There was, it seemed, no problem of stone or wood or metal that Daedalus could not solve, no object he could not improve, no wonder he could not build. He was the kind of mind that comes along once in many generations, and all of Athens knew it. But genius of that order often comes paired with a darker companion, and in Daedalus, that companion was pride, a deep, jealous pride in being the best, the cleverest, the one whose work no one else can match. For most of his life, that pride drove him to greater and greater achievements. But there came a day when Daedalus met someone whose gift threatened to rival his own. And that was when the great inventor revealed what he was willing to do to remain the best. Daedalus had taken on an apprentice, his own young nephew, a boy his sister had placed in his workshop to learn the craft. And the boy turned out to be a natural, perhaps even more naturally gifted than Daedalus himself. While still very young, the nephew began to invent things of his own. Walking along a shore, he picked up the spine of a fish, studied its row of sharp teeth, and from it conceived a new tool, the saw, with its line of cutting teeth, one of the most useful inventions in all of history. He devised the compass for drawing perfect circles. The boy was a prodigy, and everyone could see it. And Daedalus, the greatest craftsman in the world, watching his young apprentice blossom into a rival, was not proud of him. He was consumed with jealousy. He could not bear the thought that this child might one day surpass him, might be remembered as the greater inventor. And so Daedalus did a terrible thing. One day, high on the Acropolis of Athens, at the edge of a great height, he pushed his nephew off, murdering the boy to be rid of a rival. The crime was discovered, and Daedalus was condemned. Driven from Athens in disgrace, the greatest mind in Greece became a fugitive, and he fled across the sea to the island of Crete, where a king awaited who had very particular use for a man who could build anything. The king of Crete was Minos, the most powerful ruler in that part of the world, and he welcomed the brilliant exile gladly, for a man of Daedalus's talents was worth more than an army. For a time, Daedalus served as the royal craftsman, and all was well. But then a disaster fell upon the house of Minos, a disaster that would require Daedalus's genius to manage and would stain his hands with a new kind of horror. Minos had offended the god Poseidon, and in revenge, the god had cursed the king's own wife, Queen Pasiphae, with an unnatural and shameful passion for a great bull that belonged to the king. Tormented by this divine curse, the queen came to Daedalus, the one man clever enough to help her, and begged him to find a way. and Daedalus, the problem solver, who perhaps never paused to ask whether a problem should be solved, built her a device to satisfy the curse. From that union came a creature that should never have existed, the Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, savage and powerful, that fed on human flesh. King Minos was horrified by the thing that now lived in his household, but he could not simply kill it. So he turned, once again, to the only man who could help, Daedalus. "Hide it," the king commanded. "Build me something that this monster can never escape." And so Daedalus built his most famous creation, the Labyrinth. It was not a simple maze. It was a vast and bewildering structure of winding passages, branching corridors, and false turns, so cunningly designed that anyone who entered it would become hopelessly lost, wandering its twisting halls until they starved or until the Minotaur found them. The old stories say that Daedalus himself, the man who designed every inch of it, could barely find his own way back out once it was built. Into the heart of this labyrinth, the Minotaur was placed, sealed away in the center of the maze where it could harm no one except those who were deliberately sent in. And people were sent in. King Minos, in his power, forced the city of Athens to pay a horrific tribute. Every few years, a group of young Athenian men and women, 7 youths and 7 maidens, were shipped to Crete and driven into the labyrinth to wander lost in the dark until the Minotaur devoured them. It was a nightmare with no apparent end, a tax paid in the lives of the young, and it went on year after year. Daedalus had built a perfect prison, and it had become a perfect slaughterhouse. But the maze that no one could escape was about to meet the one combination that could defeat it, and once again, the cleverness of Daedalus would be at the very center of it. The thing that finally broke the horror of the labyrinth was a hero and a thread. A young Athenian prince named Theseus volunteered to be one of the victims sent into the maze, determined to kill the Minotaur and end the tribute forever. And when he arrived in Crete, the king's own daughter, the princess Ariadne, fell in love with him and resolved to help him survive. She went, of course, to Daedalus, for who else would know how to beat the maze that Daedalus had built? And the inventor gave her the answer. The elegant solution that only he could have devised, a simple ball of thread. Theseus was to tie one end at the entrance of the labyrinth and unwind it behind him as he went, so that however deep into the maze he wandered, he could always follow the thread back out again. It worked perfectly. Theseus went in, found the Minotaur at the heart of the maze, killed the monster, and followed Daedalus's thread back to the entrance and to freedom, leading the other young Athenians out with him. The unbeatable labyrinth had been beaten, and King Minos, when he learned how, flew into a rage. For he understood at once that no one could have solved his perfect maze without help from the one man who knew its every secret. Daedalus had betrayed him, and the king's revenge would fall upon the inventor and upon the person he loved most. King Minos seized Daedalus and, with him, the inventor's young son Icarus, and imprisoned them both, some say in the labyrinth itself, the very maze Daedalus had created, now turned into his own cell. Minos controlled the sea and all the ships. There was no escape by water, no road off the island that the king did not watch. Daedalus was trapped on Crete, a prisoner of his own genius and his own creation. But Daedalus was Daedalus, and a locked island was just another problem to be solved. If Minos held the land and the sea, the inventor reasoned, then there remained one road the king did not control, the sky. And so Daedalus conceived his most daring invention of all. He gathered feathers, large and small, and bound them together in the shape of great wings, fastening them with thread and sealing them with wax, curving them like the wings of a real bird until he had made 2 pairs, one for himself and one for his son. They would simply fly away, up off the island and out over the open sea, where no ship could ever follow. But before they leapt from their high perch, Daedalus gave Icarus one careful, desperate warning, the warning of a father who, for once in his life, understood the limits of his own creation. "Do not fly too low," Daedalus told his son, "or the damp and the spray of the sea will soak your feathers and drag you down." And do not fly too high, he warned, or the heat of the sun will melt the wax that holds your wings together. Keep to the middle way, stay close to me, and you will be safe. And then they leapt from the height, and the impossible happened. They flew. Up off the island of Crete, out over the open sea, two human figures soaring through the air on wings of feather and wax, free at last. For a while, all was well. But Icarus was young, and the joy of flight was overwhelming, and he forgot his father's warning. Thrilled by the sheer wonder of it, the boy climbed higher and higher up toward the blazing sun, and just as Daedalus had warned, the heat softened the wax, the feathers loosened and came away, and the wings fell apart in the open sky. Icarus plunged down and down, past his helpless father, into the sea far below, where he drowned. Daedalus could only watch. The greatest inventor in the world, who had solved every problem ever set before him, who had built the maze and the wings and 100 wonders besides, could not save his own son. He flew on alone, grief-stricken, and came at last to safety in Sicily, carrying with him the one problem his genius could never solve. Daedalus lived on, and the old stories follow him into a bitter old age in Sicily, where the relentless King Minos eventually tracked him down, only to be outwitted and killed by the inventor one final time. But it is not the clever escapes we remember. It is the wreckage. Look back over the life of Daedalus, and you see a trail of brilliance that almost always ends in ruin. A murdered nephew, a monstrous birth, a maze built to swallow the young, a drowned son. He was the most gifted man of his age, able to make anything he could imagine, and that, in the end, was exactly the problem. For Daedalus had genius, but he did not have wisdom, and the two are not the same thing. He could always answer the question of whether a thing could be done, and he almost never stopped to ask whether it should be done. He built whatever he was asked to build, solved whatever he was asked to solve, and left others, or fate, to deal with the consequences. The Greeks were a people who prized cleverness, but they were wary of it too, and in Daedalus they left a lasting warning that intelligence without restraint, skill without judgment, the power to create without the wisdom to ask why, can build marvels that the maker himself will live to mourn. The wings really did fly. That was never the trouble. The trouble was the boy who wore them. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.